Oh, that's cute. Good job, girls. What is it, your birthday or what? Okay, no, it's not. Maybe it is, I don't know. But anyway, we're going to read scripture. So come on up. Don and Jeannie are going to pitch in. We're in the book of Esther. In the Bibles in front of you, it's page 412. Esther chapter 4, verses 13 to 17. Yeah, that mic should be hot. So Esther chapter 4, 13 to 17. We're going to be covering the whole book of Esther today, but this is a good representation of what's going on here.
Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?"
Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish."
Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him.
Nice. That's good. Thank you. Good job, Don. Good job, Jeannie. Thank you. All right. Good. So, before we get into Esther, I just want to say Happy Mother's Day to you mothers. And I know my mom passed away in 2008. And so I know what it's like to lose a mom. And you know, when you say Happy Mother's Day, I know to many it's a great day. And to some, it just reawakens some pain and disappointment. And so I just want to pause and to those of you that gave birth this year, we celebrate with you. To those of you that have lost a mother, we mourn with you. To those that are in the trenches with little kids, we respect and remember those days. To those that have warm, close relationships with your children, we celebrate that. But to those that have disappointment, heartache, and distance with kids, we hope and pray with you for reconciliation. And so we know there's a whole mix of things going on with Mother's Day. I woke up early this morning, 3 o'clock, couldn't sleep, and so I started reading, and I ran across this news article. Barna Research did a thing on mothers, and they found that 56% of moms say that stress increased during COVID, kind of cut off from their community. The whole thrust of this research was that community is critical for mothers to thrive. Trust. 70% of mothers said they do not trust their community with their children. And, you know, so you don't just give kids to anybody, but 70% seems kind of high. Again, kind of cut off from community there. Authenticity, only 20% feel that they can be vulnerable and share their faults and weaknesses with somebody else. So we kind of walled up there. Belonging, only 28% believe they're valued by their community. Purpose and meaning, 20% regularly feel that they're able to contribute meaning and purpose to the world, only 20%. So that it just paints a very needy, hurting picture for moms in this world. It's very, very difficult. It reminded me of that quote I had up here a while ago that just talked about women in general in this culture, and it was written from that perspective of somebody who's not a believer, but basically said, this world, this culture in which women live is designed to make them fail. With all of the expectations that you get hit with and all of the things you see on social media. And so we really want to champion the moms and the women in general and encourage you all to find community. And this is a great place to find it. It's not the only place, you know, but probably better than the pickleball teams in terms of significance. Anyway, so I remembered this quote by Tony Campolo, just a guy from Pennsylvania, but he was on faculty at the University of Pennsylvania years ago. And he'd go to these meetings, and all these other PhD women and women lawyers would bump into his wife, and they'd be like, well, what do you do? And he says she's, one of the smartest women that he had ever met. And she came up with this reply in those academic circles. She said, I am socializing two Homo sapiens in the dominant values of the Judeo-Christian tradition in order that they might be instruments for the transformation of the social order in the teleological prescribed utopia inherent in the eschaton. What do you do? And she said somehow just, a doctor or lawyer just kind of fell flat, And so anyway, so yeah, if you are socializing two Homo sapiens to be successful for God's kingdom, that is super important, okay? So moms, you can email me. I'll give this to you if you want to memorize it. And anyway, that's all good and fun. But seriously, Grace Life Bible Church, we're thrilled about our values, knowing God and His Word, experiencing and extending grace, growing in healthy relationships, impacting others near and far. And so we talk a lot about grace, but I don't know if I've ever defined it. Grace is unmerited favor in spite of merited judgment. Like the paycheck we got coming is judgment, but instead God steps in and He gives us grace. He takes the judgment and gives us His righteousness, and it's a good deal. Sign up for it quickly. All right. So that's where we're going with that, and these are some pyramids that we've seen before. Our main thing here is to become a disciple and make disciples. That's what our church is about. In order to do that, we all have our rhythms: loving God through Bible study and prayer, extending grace and forgiveness, growing in healthy relationships, serving others, and those things are actually really hard right there. And then they rest on our values of knowing God, experiencing and extending grace, growing in relationships, impacting the world. So that's just in a nutshell where we are, who we are, and how we roll. And if that's too much, just boil it down to experiencing God's grace and extending God's grace. That's what the t-shirts and bumper stickers will say when we come out with those, okay? All right. So have you ever been alone? I mean, really, really alone. I was in probably third grade. I lived in Oregon at the time. My dad worked at a university. And now and then we'd go to sporting events, the Oregon State Beavers. You can just walk in. Anyway, so we went to a basketball game once, and I guess my mom drove me there. My dad met us at the campus. So we looked at the basketball game, and after the end of the game, everyone stands. It's a bit chaotic. Each of them thought I went home with the other one. So we lived way out in the country down a gravel road, and so they go out of town, into the country, pull in, they get home, and they look at each other. Where's John? So they kind of panic a little bit, and then they drive all the way back, and I didn't know what to do. I'm just alone in this empty basketball. The lights are off. There's a guy mopping the floor. I just sat in my chair. I'm like, and so I'm just sitting there, and then eventually they came up, and, oh, my dear, anyway, so I was a kid, so I didn't know enough to be really concerned. I just allowed to just sit here. Another time I was alone, and sometimes it's a little more risky. I was on a motorcycle trip to the Black Hills and had the 640-pound bike, kind of an off-road dual sport thing, KLR 650 if you care, anyway. Loaded up with gear, food, camping gear, and I was going out to Mullen, Nebraska, and way off the grid, not even a road. It's just double track through grass, and I'm miles from the nearest gravel road and cell signal. And so I'm riding along, and my feet are apparently too far out like that, and I'm in a bit of a rut, and my toe hits the edge of the dirt and just snaps my tibia. And I didn't know it's broke. I'm like, wow, that hurts. I didn't even fall. So I put the kickstand down, I hop off, and I take my boot off. I'm like, wow, this really hurts. And so, but I'm like, I'm sure I can keep going. So I put my motorcycle, clamp it down super tight, and you're shifting with your foot, you know what I mean? And I keep riding. And it had rained the night before, and out in that part of the country, there's this dirt composition called loam. And when it gets wet, man, it is like smooth, slippery, and I hit that stuff and just wiped out. So now I've got a 450-pound motorcycle, a broken ankle, and a bike that I can't pick it up. I'm slipping around, and I'm like, I'm alone. How is this going to end? What do I do? I mean, no one comes through here. It's not like wait for the next car. And so I just had to undo a bunch of stuff on my bike, and eventually I got it up. And then I just kept riding to Alliance, hopping into gas stations. And it dawns on me, I should probably go home. So I go home, look on the internet, and I looked at the symptoms for a sprain. I'm like, oh, it's just sprained. So I hopped around for a couple of weeks, finally went to the doctor. 7 screws later, I'm back. Anyway, so the point is, when we're alone, we have some questions, and we can be panicked and scared, like, how is this going to end? How did I get here? Am I really alone? Has God forsaken me? Okay? It reminds me of a paradigm that we see in the book of Judges with Gideon. I don't know if you remember the Gideon. He's that one judge that he's at thrashing wheat in a cave because he's afraid of the Midianites. And an angel shows up to Gideon. Now, Gideon's whole life is marked by fear, and the angel says, "The Lord is with you, O mighty man of valor," which I think is funny, right? Anyway, and Gideon says, now listen to what he says, "Please, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us?" That is instructive. Gideon says, "Where are his wonderful miracles that our fathers told us about? Saying, didn't the Lord bring us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has forsaken us, and he's given us in the hand of Midian." So Gideon is thinking, I know God is with me. I know I'm not alone when I see miracles. Because I don't see miracles, God has forsaken us. Can you relate to that? Well, what if the angel showed up and said, "Hey, oh man of valor, oh woman of courage and honor, the Lord is with you"? Would you be able to say, well, if he's with me, why did A, B, and C happen? Or why did X, Y, and Z not happen? I mean, we all have things we could put in the blank. We all have disappointments and pains. It's just the nature of life in a fallen planet. We're redeemed in the midst of those things, not out of those things, okay? And so I'm reminded of that perspective that Gideon had. So, do you ever feel like God has left you? Maybe you see other families and on social media, they are so happy, they're complete, and they have everything I don't. God is with them, but he's not with my family because A, B, and C happened, or X, Y, and Z didn't happen. And so we can get into that Gideon mindset of just like, I'm alone, I'm forsaken, and God forgot me. Maybe I did something too bad. Maybe I'm outside the realm of his goodness because whatever it is. But today we're going to be in the book of Esther. She is alone. She is alone in a foreign country under the control of a foreign king who doesn't know Yahweh. Her life and the life of all the Jews are hanging in the balance. So she knows what it is to be alone, and we're going to see God's goodness to her. So the story there is the exiles had left Persia. She was back in Persia. And so that's why she's alone. But, you know, the Jews left. They're back. Some Jews are still in Persia. So can you see God working in your story? Here's where I'm going today. Esther, can you see him? Now, before you pull up Amazon Prime and try to find the series, I just made it up. It doesn't exist. So put your phone down. You're not going to anyway. So season 1, 7 episodes. Esther, can you see him? Can you see God in your situation where you're at? Okay, that's where we're going to go. So if you remember, back a while ago, we talked about Judges and Saul, tribe of Benjamin. In the book of Judges, Benjamin is the problem, Judah is the solution. All the kings were supposed to come through Judah, but Saul was the first king, wrong tribe, wrong man, wrong reason. Everything's wrong about Saul. And he was supposed to kill this one enemy called Agag. And he doesn't. Remember that? And Samuel comes up, "Hey, what's going on?" "Oh, I obeyed, but the people," and so that didn't turn out well. But the point is Esther is from the tribe of Benjamin. She kind of redeems Benjamin in terms of the overall story of Scripture. But Haman, the story of Esther very clearly points out Haman is an Agagite. So you have this renewed Benjamin Agagite thing that if Saul had done what he should have been, the story of Esther wouldn't even happen because Haman isn't around. So, okay, well, let's go and review because review is our favorite, right? We love to review. And so just keep saying that. Anyway, this is the Old Testament. Esther here is at the end of the history books. There's a lot of other books that come historically after that. And so, oh yeah, Queen Esther. So a while ago, we went down to Branson and caught the Sight and Sound thing with Esther. It's crazy good. We went to Branson because Utah had snow in it, but it was still fun. Anyway, so we went with our family. There were my 2 boys and their wives, and it was a great show. So Esther, that's good. Anyway, we've been through all these main characters: Adam, Noah, Abraham, Joshua, Gideon, Moses, Saul, David, Solomon. We didn't go through 40 kings, but they're there, and Judah's return. Remember the books of poetry. Now, I modified this slide. The book of Job happens chronologically in the time of Genesis. It's a very old book. The books of poetry, the rest of them are Samuel, Kings. And then the books of prophecy happen during Kings, Chronicles, Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther. So by the time you get to the book of Esther, chronologically, everything that is going to happen in the Old Testament is already happened. Okay, so Esther is chronologically the end of the road. All right? So that leads us to this. This is an interesting chart. If you're new here, this is a timeline, and Solomon dies here, and there's a split in the kingdom. There's the northern nation of Israel that's annihilated by Assyria in 722. Down here is the exile of Judah under the power of Babylon. There's 3 deportations, and the temple is destroyed in 586. The temple's rebuilt in 516. So there's 3 deportations under the evil nation of Babylon and Nebuchadnezzar. And then Cyrus takes over and wipes out Babylon, 539, and then he starts the returns. There's 3 returns under Persia. And here's what Chronicle says about that. He took into exile in Babylon those who had escaped from the sword, and they became servants to him to his sons until the establishment of the kingdom of Persia, to fill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed its Sabbaths. All the days that it lay desolate, it kept Sabbath to fulfill 70 years. And so we talked about that. They had ignored the Sabbath, which is one every 7 years, for about 500 years. So that's 70 Sabbaths or so. So that's where we're going here. And just to add more stuff, the returns. So hopefully you're comfortable with this. You know, we understand Assyria is the dominant nation here, Babylon, the deportations, the returns. Now, the first return is covered in the first 6 chapters of the book of Ezra. Cyrus, the new king, tells the Jews, go home. The leader of that is Zerubbabel, all right? Now, the second return is led by Ezra. Ezra 7 through 12 talks about that. Artaxerxes gave a decree and said, go back and build Jerusalem. The third return is led by Nehemiah. Artaxerxes gave another decree, said, rebuild the walls. But the weird thing here is that if you look at Persian history, there's a king that gets overlooked in the book of Ezra. Ahasuerus, Xerxes, Esther's husband, Vashti's husband, that happens between chapter 6 and 7. So when you go from Ezra 6 to 7, you just blitz through 57 years that Ezra skips. Why does he do that? Does he deserve a C-? No, he deserves an A+. Okay, I'm not grading people when you get to heaven, but I'm just saying, because his focus is the temple. And the story of Esther is got nothing to do with Jerusalem or the temple. So he's like, skip. He's like, temple. I mean, the kings that said, hey, go back, that's a big deal. He's writing about him. Hey, go back and build the temple. That's a big deal. Write about him, okay? So just so you know, that's what's going on. Here's another way to look at it. Ezra 6, Darius, resume temple rebuilding. Ezra 7, rebuild the walls. And right between these is Xerxes, Ahasuerus. Xerxes is his Greek name. Ahasuerus is his Hebrew name. And that's where we're at. Okay? So just so we understand that, Ezra wrote Chronicles to motivate people to come back. The first 9 chapters are genealogies. The exiles would be thrilled about that. One of the reasons they didn't go back is because they thought you don't know enough to make going back worthwhile. We can't do temple worship because you don't know who the Levites are. Well, the first 9 chapters answer that. So they would be ecstatic about the first 9 chapters. We're like, I just want to skip. Anyway, so he wrote then Ezra to motivate the returned exiles to rebuild the temple. It was all about the temple, okay? So all of this happens under the banner of Cyrus. Now, Cyrus was a big deal. Here's a verse about Cyrus. Did you know that God named the work of Cyrus 200 years before Cyrus was born? Isaiah 44:28, 200 years before Cyrus was born. The Lord says of Cyrus, he is my shepherd, he shall fulfill my purposes. saying of Jerusalem, she shall be built. Of the temple, your foundation shall be laid. I summon you by name and bestow on you a title of honor, though you do not acknowledge me. Isn't that great? So Cyrus is, he's drafting his plans of world importance, and God is like, I can use that arrogance. I can use that confidence. I can use that power, that strength, that wealth. And he merges those things with his purposes. In fact, here's the decree, the very last couple verses of 2 Chronicles. The first year of the Cyrus, king of Persia. Remember, that's the Lord stirred up Cyrus, king of Persia. He made a proclamation. This is what he said. Cyrus, the king of Persia, the Lord, the God of heaven, has given me all the kingdoms of earth, and he has charged me to build him a house in Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Whoever is among you, his people, may God be with him and go. Now, he did that to all his conquered kingdoms. He gave them money to invest. It was in his best political interest, if his subjugated lands were thriving. And so I'll get into his political tactics later, but they were pretty lenient. So here's a piece of clay that dried super hard, and it has words on it. The words are his more of his language, his decrees. Just listen to the tone here. It says, I am Cyrus, king of the world. When I entered Babylon, I did not allow anyone to terrorize the land. I kept in view the needs of the people and all its sanctuaries to promote their well-being. I put an end to their misfortune. The great God, that's not Yahweh, but the great God has delivered all lands into my hands, the lands that I have made to dwell in peaceful habitation. He is talking about a God called Ahura Mazda, kind of a thing with wings. But anyway, that's I got a picture later. I know that will bless you. But when he took over, he was welcomed as a hero because the last king of Babylon was really just an idiot. He was forcing people to worship gods they didn't want to worship, and they literally welcomed Cyrus as a liberator. Like, please deliver us from this guy, Nabonidus. And so minimal fighting, and just they were like, we need something new. So he ruled over more land than anybody else. Let's see. Here's a video that didn't work last time, but look at this. So Egypt, that would be Joseph, Old Testament. And then you get into the Hittite Empire, which is kind of behind the scenes. But then Israel's kingdom, right there. Saul, David, Solomon. And then we get into our ABCs. Assyria, dominant nation. And then Babylon, which is slightly bigger than Assyria. And then C for Cyrus, first king of Persia, bigger yet. And then after that, we have the Greece Empire, Macedonian. And after that, the New Testament realm, we have Rome. You can see down here 0, that would be the Roman Empire. So that's basically just a simple video of what's going on there. So Cyrus, I don't know if I probably need to, yeah, good, I got a blank. Cyrus is ruling, and he lets the people go. His son Cambyses was king, and he's off in Egypt conquering everything. And while he's away, this is just a fun history thing, okay? Actually has not much to do with the story of Esther, but it's a background information. So his son Cambyses is off fighting, and while he's away fighting in Egypt, back at home, someone pretends to be the other son of Cyrus, Cambyses' brother. Pretends to be, okay? And he says, I am the king's, son, and you should worship me. And he becomes king, an imposter for 7 months, becomes king. So finally, Cambyses, he's camping at Mount Carmel. He hears this. He hops on his horse. Quickly, he's going to go back. And they had swords, and they had sheaths like, you do for sword. History is a little vague on this. All it says is that he died by his own hand. Well, he didn't commit suicide. Other resources say that he tried to sheath his sword, he missed, and stuck it in his leg. And a warrior's sword back in those days, like a petri dish, right? And so he ended up dying of an infection. I'm like, dude, you're king of the world, and you miss? And that's how you go out? I'm like, oh Lord, please, I don't want that, right? Anyway, so a little quirk in history. So meanwhile, Cambyses is dead, the son of Cyrus. His brother was killed by this imposter. So who's going to be king? Well, Darius is just a servant in the king's army, and he emerges. He goes back home. He discovers the imposter. The imposter's name is Guamata, and he kills him. He kills him on September 29th, 522. I love it that there's specific dates to this stuff. Isn't that great? Anyway, and so Darius takes over as king, but he's not the king's son. What right does he have? Well, he discovered the bad guy, he killed the bad guy, and so he's making a case that he should be king. And so he makes this is the first political ad, I think, in history, certainly of this magnitude, right? 350 feet above the ground, he has this massive wall mural showing those guys there. If you look closer, there's a guy with a really funny hat, but right there. Anyway, he is making a case that he has the right to rule. And so he explains that the text is written in Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian Akkadian. And this is why they discovered cuneiform script, because it's the same thing in 3 languages. And it's like the Rosetta Stone, the same thing, different languages. So anyway, he explains the whole thing about this imposter and how Darius is a hero because he's the one that found him, he's the one that killed him, and he's the one that's king. But he goes on, listen to this language about how the god Ahura blessed him. I killed the imposter, and I besought the help of Ahura Mazda. Ahura Mazda bore me aid, and then I with a few men killed Gwamada, the imposter. I took the kingdom from him. By the favor of Ahura Mazda, I became, and on and on and on and on. So he's oblivious to Yahweh, but he points to that event there. So this is going on in the kingdom, and then he resumes temple construction, all right? Finishes the temple in 516. We had that on that chart a while ago. See if we got another one. So under Darius's reign, Darius, his big thing is go build the temple. He's the guy that was not a direct descendant of Cyrus, but they finished the temple in 516. And in between these two parts is the story of Esther. That's where we're headed. So, then the second return, the third return, so all these returns are going back. Now, think about it this way. We see this whole chart, and we're like, okay, first return, second, third. If you are living during Esther's time, you don't know the second return is going to happen. All you know is that the return is behind you. People left. You didn't leave. You have no idea there's a second return. You're stuck in Persia. And remember this culture, I've talked about this before, how they associated gods of the nations with political boundaries. So when you crossed from Egypt into the Negev, you crossed from the realm of the Egyptian gods into other gods. When you left the Negev into Canaan, you left the gods of the wilderness and you entered different gods of Baal. So they just assumed that when you're in a place, the gods of that place are the most powerful God. Now, Yahweh's trying to convince them that wherever you go, I'm more powerful than anything, and that's just super hard for them to figure out. So, when they're back in Persia, the Jews went back to God's land. God is with them. You see how they can think? Is God with us? Are we alone? Are we forsaken? Are we forgotten? Can God bless us and protect us here and also be back there in our homeland with the temple? That was just like super difficult for them to figure out. So that's the background of Esther. Here's episode 1, 2, 3. So we'll get into these, but 7 episodes. The book of Esther is written in terms of 7 episodes. Here's the first episode, okay? So it takes place in a place called Susa. So this is the Persian Empire, Susa. And there's 3 feasts and no queen, okay? So there's the whole book of Esther revolves around feasts and anger. You'll see that. I'll make a case for that. But the king gave 2 empire-wide feasts, and Vashti, hey, come dance before everybody. And she's like, I will not. It reminds me of a friend that I probably shouldn't say that because we're being taped. But anyway, it was a misunderstanding about some language and nationality. And anyway, that was awkward. So we'll move on. So the king is anger at Vashti. She is kicked out, and that creates obviously a vacuum, a need. But this party was 180 days long. I don't know about you, but I'm like, I got stuff to do. I can't. I mean, you asked me to a party for 100, unless it's in Utah, I'm in. I'll bring my bike, but other than that, sorry, I can't go. Anyway. Episode 2, okay, chapter 2, the king's anger at Vashti subsides. Now, there's a couple times where it says specifically, the king's anger subsided. So you see God behind the picture. Anyway, Esther is replaced Vashti. There's another banquet. This is now chapter 2, and you're already at feast number 4. So these feasts are a big deal. And then during this time, Mordecai, he has a job hanging out by the king's gate, and he hears a plot to kill the king. Now, Mordecai is, the text, it's interesting. It says he was bringing up Esther, his cousin. Some translations say his uncle's daughter. No translation says it was his niece. Okay, so it's cousin. Your uncle's daughter is your cousin. So anyway, Esther is selected to be queen. There's a feast. He overhears a plot, and this plot is going to come into play later. Episode 3, the king and Haman celebrate Haman's evil decree at feast number 5, and the city of Susa was in confusion. So Haman, the Agagite, right, who shouldn't even be alive, hates the Jews, and he wants to annihilate them. He's supposed to be honored by everybody, but Mordecai doesn't honor him, and that just infuriates him, so he wants to kill the Jews. And so he convinces the king to make this decree to wipe out all. He uses super vague language. Oh, there's these people in the kingdom that are just poison and toxic, and they're going to overthrow you, and I think we should kill them all, men, women, and children. The king's like, go ahead. And he doesn't know it's Jews, all right? So letters were sent by couriers to all the king's provinces with instructions to destroy, kill, and annihilate all Jews, young and old, women and children, to plunder their goods. The couriers went out hurriedly by order of the king. And the king and Haman sat down to drink in a feast, but the city of Susa was thrown into confusion. You can imagine. That's just crazy. So what happens here is that Haman, in this culture, you wouldn't dare undertake such a major task without consulting the gods, and they did that by casting lots. The Persian word for lot is pur. It's where Purim, the Hebrew festival, that's why it's called that, okay, the casting of lots. So they cast lots at the beginning of the year because basically it's like, okay, this upcoming year, what do we got going on? So roll the dice, cast the lots to see, and the lot, by chance, or if you want to think about it, the equivalent of dice, it came up to be, you should annihilate all the Jews in the 11th month. Now think about the beauty of that. It's the first month. They have 11 months to respond and figure it out. Isn't that great? Instead of like the second month. Proverbs 16:33 says, the lot is cast into the lap, but every decision is from the Lord. Just don't go to Las Vegas and quote this because you'll be misusing scripture, all right? So, and that gets us to episode 4. Haman is defeated through Mordecai and Esther's fasting and Esther's feasts, 2 feasts, number 6 and 7, and for the king. So, the first banquet, I kind of get the sense that Esther's a little timid because she holds the banquet, she doesn't do anything. You know, she's sort of like, the king is like, what do you want? Anything. Another banquet. Okay, so the other banquet. And then finally at this one, she points on the picture left there. Evil Haman, he's got this evil plan. And so to annihilate all the Jews. So that the Jews mourn, they weep, and they fast, which is another central theme of the story. All right, so and then chapter 5, the banquet, she's silent, and then the king can't sleep. And so the king, I don't know what you do when you can't sleep, but I couldn't sleep, so I start reading news. But anyway, he's reading the chronicles of memorable deeds. And so he hears in this chronicle about Mordecai, how he heard about the plot to assassinate the king, and how the king's life was saved by some guy called Mordecai. And so the king is like, well, who's this guy? What was done for him? So that happened 4 years earlier. The king says, who's in the court? Now, Haman had just come into the court to talk about the king, about having Mordecai hanged on these gallows. By the way, gruesome fact, they don't hang people in the Old Testament with ropes in the necks, that they impale them on large stakes. That's just the way they did it. So anyway, the king asked Haman, what should be done for the man who delights to honor? Now, Haman is like, this is my chance. What should I do for the man that the king wants to honor? Well, it must be me. And so Haman just goes off on this big, long thing. Let royal robes and the king's horse and a crown and honor and praise and have someone parade him through this. And this is the king, okay? And then, this is great. The king says to Haman, hurry, take the robes, the horse, as you have said, and do so to Mordecai the Jew, who sits at the gate. Leave nothing out that you've mentioned. It's just, right? It's incredible. And so Haman is like, it just keeps heaping on. It's just difficult. So then Esther points to Haman and say, hey, this is the evil plan he has. And so here's Haman taking the robes and the horse, dressed Mordecai, let him go through the square, proclaiming, this is to be done for the man in whom the king delights. So this is Haman, and that's Mordecai the Jew. And Haman was the, forget, like vice president, it's not what it was, prime minister, I think. Anyway, and at the end of the story, Mordecai gets his job. It's interesting. Okay, next episode, number 5. The Jews celebrate with feast number 8 over Mordecai's counter decree, and the city of Susa shouted and rejoiced. So you see that when righteousness reigns, there's rejoicing. When evil reigns, there's confusion. And that the king allowed the Jews who were in every city to gather, defend their lives, destroy, kill, annihilate, any armed force of people, province that might attack them. So this is part of the counter decree. Instead of wiping out the Jews, they're allowed to defend themselves. And so, episode 5. So Esther had Haman's 10 sons hanged. Jews killed 300 men in Susa that opposed the Jews. And then the Jews, it's kind of odd because the king is like, honey, what do you want? Anything that you want. Wow, we need more ammunition where there's more people to kill. So that's what she says. And they kill 75 more thousand people. All right. Now, you can look at that, and if you don't understand the culture in Deuteronomy 28, and you're going to be kind of confused, but this is God's way of providing space, security for the Jews in a foreign land. Now, let me just say this. Persia, in a land where God is not named, right? God is not known or named in Persia, except by the Jews, but the story of Esther, and you probably know this Bible trivia. What does not show up in the book of Esther? The name of God. So in a land that doesn't name God, in a book that doesn't even name God, the looming question, is God present? Is God able to protect and bless his people? And if you read the story of Esther with that question in mind, he just keeps showing up at every corner and everything's reversed, right? It's just amazing how he is very much, even though Esther is alone, feels alone, God is very much in her story. And in case you're tuning out, you need to hear that even though you may feel alone or actually be alone in some sense, you are not alone. God is very much in the middle of some story of redemption. And I know that arc of redemption I talk about now and then, we want that arc of redemption to be about 45 minutes, and often it's 45 years. And it's painful for us when we're in the middle of that, because I have these prayer requests, these legitimate needs and desires for reconciliation or whatever, and I'm like, 10 years? What? I'm supposed to wait? That's where we need faith, and just to walk faithfully with God and enjoy him for who he is and let him continue to work. Okay, so episode 6, Mordecai and Esther establish 2 feasts. So Haman, the Agagite, shows up several times. The enemy of the Jews plotted against the Jews to destroy them. He had cast pur, that is lots, or like rolling the dice, chance kind of decisions, to crush and destroy them. But when it came before the king, he gave orders in writing that his evil plan that he had devised against the Jews should return on his own head, and that he and his son should be hanged on the gallows. Therefore, the Jews called these days Purim, after the term pur, which has to do with Lot. Okay, so celebrating the reversal of the annihilation, and then a happy ending. Mordecai is exalted. He gets Haman's job. He's the prime minister now. He was great among the Jews, popular with the multitude of his brothers. He sought the welfare of his people, unlike Haman. Spoke peace to all his people, unlike Haman. So that's pretty much the story of the book of Esther, but it really does address, is she alone? When you're alone, is God with you? Yes, God is with you when you're alone. In the middle of that redemptive arc, you feel alone because God's not answering my prayers, and I can't always explain that. I just know that God loves us. He's with us. He's working out his purposes, and unfortunately, his purposes sometimes take longer to bring about something that we value, that we want, that is legitimate. And so we live in the midst of tension. That's just the reality. So the book of Esther, This is too many words, but I just wanted to show you that's a chiastic structure, and we should make t-shirts about chiastic structures because they're just awesome, right? Anyway, so the first 5 feasts are by pagan people, the second 5 are by the Jews, and in between is a fasting, and God's plan. Who knows whether you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Esther's role goes from passive to active, and you can make a big case here that the book of Esther pivots on her courageous decision to not be silent. If you're silent, we're dead. How would you like that for pressure? The entire Jewish race depend on you. Well, she can't just waltz into the king's presence. If you do that, that's you're killed. Nobody does that, but she does it. And the king, extends the scepter. Okay, don't kill her, guards, let her come. And so this whole story unfolds because of her willingness to be active in her faith. And then so feasting is a big part of this, and you can see confusion at the end of the pagan feasts, and in the middle of the Jews, there's rejoicing and shouting of joy. The other theme is anger, and so the king is angry at Vashti, and she's banished. Haman sees Mordecai, and Mordecai escapes Haman's anger. And then down here, king's anger is against Haman, and he's hanged on gallows that were ironically designed for Mordecai. So anger, feasting, those things all are central to the story. Do you guys ever think God is angry at you? You ever think, I could have thought that my motorcycle is tipped over, I crashed, I broke my leg. God hates me. Why did this happen? Right? We can go there. A lot of things happen, and sometimes our first thought is like, what did I do wrong? God, is he punishing me? Now, he disciplines us. Personally, I don't think of God in terms of punishment. I think in God in terms of discipline. I think you see it in the Old Testament. But anyway, and so I'm like, okay, Lord, I have scars on my body from discipline. Like, John, if you keep going on this path, you're going to be very much hurting and in deep pain and consequences. And so bam, the 2x4 in the face. Like, okay. Which sometimes we all need. So do you think God is angry at you? Can you see him in your story? And even though that takes faith, we want to do that. So the book of Esther is full of crazy interventions by God, like the marital squabble. If Vashti isn't banished, there's no platform for Esther, right? If Esther's not beautiful, she doesn't make the cut, and the story's over in chapter 1. At the job site, Mordecai has a job he overhears. We're going to kill the king. And he's like, hey, they're going to kill the king. And these 2 guys then were captured. The throw of the dice happens in the first month, but it's not going to be affected until the 11th month. They have all this time that God gave them to plan things out. The king can't sleep. And so he's reading the chronicles of important things. And he's like, blah, 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 Mordecai saved the king. What? What are you talking about? Short walk in the garden. I didn't get to this, but Ahasuerus returns from contemplating thing, and it says Haman was falling on the couch of Esther. And it's just a vague phrase, but it was enough for the king to think that Haman was assaulting Esther. So he's like, you're dead. Of course, the gallows, that flipped back. And anyway, there's just a lot of situations where God is very, very specifically involved. And I think the comforting thing is that when you think you're alone, the equivalent of in a foreign place that worship foreign gods and nobody understands you, you in fact are not alone. God is very much involved in your life. We do need faith to see that. We have to draw near to him to have eyes that recognize his handiwork in our lives. We have to be patient with him in that arc of redemption. And one of my favorite verses is Mordecai, such faith. He's like, Esther, if you don't speak up, we're dead. And then he says, deliverance for the Jews will arise some other time. It won't be us. We'll be killed, but God is faithful. And his plan is not going to be annihilated by this guy. His plan, and I love that because sometimes we demand, in my lifetime, I want this. You know what I mean? And that's not ours to call out, is it? Deliverance will occur. So it reminds me, and my wife and I, we had this devotional Monday or Tuesday last week. Psalm 6 came up, and it just struck me. David is pouring out his heart. He's like, I am languishing. My soul is troubled. How long? Deliver my life. I'm weary with mourning. This is all present tense. Every night I cry. My eyes waste away of grief. And then it ends with this: the Lord has heard my plea. The Lord accepts my prayer. The end. No happy ending. He's just left in the midst of that tension. I am, present tense, troubled, weary, languishing, and I pray, and God hears me. So I'll just sit here in the tension, wait for his deliverance, walk with him, love him, be faithful to him. Probably a good idea to specifically count your blessings so you don't tip to the negative, but there's a lot of things. Community is really important at this time, really important. Gideon didn't have good community. If the Lord is good, how come I got bad things? Yeah, we don't want to mimic that, okay? So, key questions. We always end up on these things. You may feel forgotten, but you are not forgotten. God is with you. He's active in your story. Can you see him? It requires prayer. Now, one of the central things of this story is fasting and prayer to get God's perspective, God's timing, and that is really, really important. It requires faith to see him in the darkest seasons and patience because it just is not on our timeline. You know what I mean? But God's faithfulness is worth waiting for. It's worth walking with him closely. And I love this book because in a land that doesn't name God, in a book that doesn't name God, God is everywhere. It's just comical how frequently it is. And so if you're ever down in Branson, I encourage you to see the play because you'll be like, that was way better than that sermon I heard. And it is. It's amazing. Anyway, Lord, thank you for your goodness. Thank you for your grace. Thank you for the courage of Esther, who walks into the king's presence, literally risking her life on behalf of other people. She didn't take the comfort route. May we walk with you in faith and not demand that you do X, Y, and Z. And that's hard because you're good. Well, why wouldn't you do these things that are clearly in line with your character and your presence and your goodness? We struggle with that. I just pray that you would satisfy us with your faithfulness. You've been so faithful through all the Old Testament with so many different people. May we trust you with your timing, and may we receive your goodness and grace and grow closer to you in our seasons, our dark seasons where things are at risk, where we feel alone, and may you comfort us in those times. And may we comfort others who are in similar situations. So I pray for our community that you would draw us together and that we would grow closer to one another in community, especially for moms and those that are struggling to be moms or maybe have lost moms or lost children or spouses, that you would comfort them in a special way. Amen.